that it puts the right amount of pressure, but gets the right support as well to be able to go through the divestment process. The fourth area is technology. No country, no developed country has become successful without innovating, without its own IPRs, which it then uses to produce not only for itself, but it uses across the world. Countries like ourselves, over the last century, have imported innovation from the developed world and produced across all kinds of categories. But in today's times, we are increasingly seeing, we're seeing that in the digital sphere, but we're seeing that in many other areas as well. We have the ability to innovate because we have the minds who are innovating all over the world anyway. We have the ability to innovate for ourselves and for the world. Towards this, we need the right government policies to further channelize technology investment, innovation, and incentivize the same in the right way. We believe towards this direction, and given the progress that we are making already in digitalization, and we can see that in financial services to start. India today accounts for over 40% of monthly digital payments around the world. We do more monthly digital payments every month than the US and China put together. 6 billion transactions on a set of digital protocols created open source, free by the government. This has happened nowhere else in the world. This is something for us to be proud of. And it's very timely that our new data protection bill is just out for comments and will get implemented soon, because this is going to set the stage for the next set of reform, business opportunity, and affordability and access going even beyond financial services, health, public utilities, welfare services, as we saw during the pandemic, and many other areas. And once again, in this type of world, India can lead. Last but not the least is climate change and sustainability. India has taken a significant positive position over here, not just complaining to the rest of the world that you've gone and created your carbon for growth. Now let us do the same. But we are walking the talk with our investment in renewable energy. Interestingly, this green world that's coming up in front of us is a whole new business opportunity as well. Whether it's products, it's services, it's green finance, it's innovation around that. India and like-minded countries can come together where we can co-innovate and co-produce for the world. Towards this, the government could come up with a green procurement policy to encourage industry as well. To conclude, as a country, we have shown significant resilience over the last few years, but we can't take our economic growth for granted. We need to think of the next set of reforms. We need to think of the next set of business opportunities, and we need to believe in ourselves as not only a country that can innovate and produce for ourselves, but for the world in coming years. Keeping that in mind, may I now invite our panelists to share their thoughts, and post that, based on time, I will request them to take a few questions. Let me start by inviting Ms. Dawra.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bajaj, for setting the stage for our discussion. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. As I understand, we are talking about three concerns here. One is about reforms. How are we going ahead? Secondly, what role infrastructure and logistics is going to play, and how the center and states are going to work together. As we would be aware now, the word reform does not just mean relaxing regulatory barriers. It also means, how do we ease the processes? How do we bring better governance outcomes for both industry and our citizens? We've spoken about manufacturing competitiveness. It was flagged. And I do believe that the production-linked incentive scheme is a very important intervention. As the Secretariat for the PLI schemes across 14 sectors where it has been announced, we see that more than 650 applications have been approved and units are getting grounded. We have a reported investment of about 6 billion USD in the first year, which exceeds the target by 106%. Not just this, in certain sectors such as bulk drugs, telecom, white goods, food processing, electronics, we see very good results and significant amount of production, investment, and employment is being generated. At the same time, I would also like to point out the processes. We are all aware about the ease of doing business, how India has climbed up in the ranks, reduction in compliance burden, making it easier for businesses to operate and to invest. And how are we reducing the compliance burden through digitization, simplification of processes, reducing duplication, and rationalizing the processes. Also decriminalizing many of the unnecessary burdens which the business has been carrying. This does not mean that regulatory barriers are not being removed. If you look at the FDI policy, a number of relaxations have been given further, liberalization of the FDI policy. And if you see the recent sectors such as in defense, in civil aviation, in insurance, in the digital media, in coal, in telecom, considerable liberalization has happened. And we've just heard from Mr. Bajaj, the historic levels of FDI we attracted last year, about $84 billion. And this year we are on track to go beyond that to about $100 billion. Now, if we look at the processes we are putting in place to fast track investments, all the ministries today handhold the investors through their project development cells. We have the Cabinet Secretary, sir, himself heading the empowered group of secretaries to fast track investments and resolve cross-cutting issues. And we have put in place the national single window system. The soft launch has happened last year. It has already processed about 45,000 clearances for businesses. And that's where we urge businesses to look at the national single window system and use it more to cut down the time taken for them to get clearances. In this context, the national single window system is also becoming a diagnostic tool for us, a data-driven system where the states are joining the national single window system. All the ministries are joining this national single window system, and we are able to see, we are able to monitor the roadblocks. If you have applied for clearances, where is it taking more time? Where are you giving duplicate information? Where can we rationalize further? In this context, 37,000 compliances have been reduced, and we hope to use the single window more effectively with more involvement of business and industry. Coming to logistics, we are aware about the two great policy interventions which have taken place in October last year, the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti program, and this year in September, the National Logistics Policy. What has happened under this? Today, we have a portal where all the data layers, about 2,000 data layers of different infrastructure ministries have come together. We have the ports, the roads, the railways, and the airports, and we have the resources of the country, the raw material. Everything is already on the portal of the Prime Minister Gati Shakti program, and we are doing integrated holistic planning. So today, if you have to we have to put a railway line, we go to the portal and we plan the entire railway line. Is it going to serve the economic zones, the manufacturing clusters? Is the last mile connectivity and the first mile connectivity being taken care of? How is the road connecting to the railway? How is the railway connecting to the port? So the multimodal logistics, is it being taken care of? This is the prism through which all the projects are being planned. And this is also the prism through which we are looking at the projects which are already in place so that we can identify the critical infrastructure gaps. The Prime Minister Gati Shakti program, if you look at it, is a very effective program which brings the center and states together. So does EODB, the ease of doing business. So does the Business Reform Action Plan, and so does the National Single Window System, and so does the India Industrial Land Bank, where the states and center have plotted about 5 lakh hectares of industrial land, which is already being used or available for use. And so has the industrial park rating system, where all the parks of the country have been rated with the help of the states. So these are all processes which are already bringing the states and the center together to work together for reforms, for making it easy for business to come to India and to have competitiveness. The logistics policy, which aims at bringing logistical efficiency, where we've been often told that we need to improve. All these things are coming together with the center and the states working together. Whether we look at Ladakh, where we look at roads, connectivity, border roads, or connectivity to villages where the farmers or the self-help group women may be making some agricultural products or pashmina shawls, or we look at Andaman Nicobar, where we want better facilities at Port Blair, or we look at the new upcoming ports along the coast in India, or we look at better connectivity to the manufacturing clusters in the country. All of this is coming together under the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti program, and that is where we are all working together. These are some of the comments from my side, and I look forward to discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumita ji. May I now request Dr. Nageswaran for his address. Dr. Nageswaran has given some slides, I think, to be presented. Yeah.
So if it's a problem, don't worry about it. Is it there? No, sir. It's not coming out. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Sanjeev Bajaj did indeed set the right stage for all of us to deliberate on the subject of this morning. And my colleague, Ms. Sumita Dawra, spoke about the various initiatives that are already underway in order to make it possible for businesses to thrive and to invest in the country. And much of this is, of course, always in a country of this size and evolution from lower income to middle income category. These are work in progress, and we need to keep at them. Before coming this morning, I thought since many people today talk about poly-crisis, and a poly-crisis, in my view, is something that is not just a collection of multiple crises occurring at the same time, but a poly-crisis is one that is beyond human analytical capabilities to handle them all at once. So today's global environment is supposedly characterized by a poly-crisis, which is somewhat overwhelming for all the collective intelligence that humans have to be able to address them in a coherent manner. So I decided to consult artificial intelligence to prepare my speech for this morning. So everybody must have heard of the new chat GPT. So I went and checked out that AI app. I said, how do I address the employment problem in India? And it gave a very interesting answer. You have to continue to invest in infrastructure. Infrastructure will create not only jobs directly, but because it lays the foundation for further capital formation in the economy, which can generate additional jobs. Therefore, continued emphasis on infrastructure is your answer to employment generation. This was the answer that the AI app gave me. Not a bad answer, but it also left me very reassured. I don't think AI is about to take over human intelligence. It didn't give me a context-specific answer. It gave me a generic answer, and humans have the ability to place things in context better. But the important point about the infrastructure is not lost on us, for all three of us at the table, because in terms of public sector infrastructure projects, from 6.8 lakh crores in 2011-12, we have come to about 21.2 lakh crores of investment by the entire public sector system over the last 10 years. That is almost 3.5 times increase over a 10-year time span. This is public sector, not just the union government, state governments, public sector enterprises, capital expenditure that is part of revenue expenditure, etc. All those things combined, 6.8 to 21.2 lakh crores. So clearly, in the decade when non-financial corporate sector and the banking system were repairing balance sheets, the public sector took over and kept up economic growth throughout the second decade of the millennium. And it has continued well into the, I think we can skip the slides. And it has continued well into the current decade. You can skip it, yeah. Continued well into the current decade as well. So we need to obviously, at some point in time, decide whether we continue to scale up the investment at the same pace or allow private sector to start functioning as the primary engine of capital formation in the economy, for which all of us have been waiting for. Last decade was good in the sense that today, if we are looking at 2023 to 2030, with the kind of balance sheets we had in 2012, we should be very concerned. But what we have now in the corporate sector are very healthy balance sheets, very healthy bottom line, and a financial system, both banking and non-banking, that is repaired, ready to lend, and the corporate sector is ready to borrow. We see that in the credit growth numbers today. So therefore, it may not be necessary or may not be healthy for public sector to keep expanding the capital investment at the same pace. Capital expenditure has to continue to increase, but not at the same pace, because we should not only be not crowding out the private sector, but also ensuring that the combined investment spending by the public and the private sector should not drive up the cost of capital too much for the economy. What are the other reforms that we need to focus on? I think most of us are aware of product market reforms that have been accomplished largely, and we know that factor market reforms are important, land and labor, etc. And much of them involve both union and state governments. And that is why Mr. Bajaj's remarks about center-state coordination or mechanisms or forums for dialogue become important. And we know about the importance of addressing the power sector, both in generation and distribution, and ensuring financial and economic viability, etc. So I'm not going to touch upon these things which are already well known and well discussed. We need to talk about, and even with respect to the population and the demographic dividend, we know that skilling and creating a large pool of semi-skilled labor and attending to higher education, because we know that primary and secondary and enrollments have improved remarkably. But we need to make sure that tertiary education enrollment also keep up. But more than this, skilling and education, as I talked about the importance of AI, which is growing. Today, the AI app may not be giving me context-specific answers, but it may not be too far off when it starts giving me very context-specific answers. So how do we then make sure that we have the employment responsibility to fulfill? There is still room for our youth to find jobs which AI cannot take away. And we need to think hard about the kind of skills that would be required that cannot be replaced by machines. And one of the more important things in that is emotional quotient. And second, the ability to have multidisciplinary perspectives. That is what is going to distinguish humans from natural intelligence from artificial intelligence. And that cannot be acquired later in life. It has to be inculcated right from the beginning. So our educational system, schools, colleges, and universities must ensure that the curriculum inculcates multidisciplinary perspectives in our students. Mr. Bajaj also spoke about the privatization and divestment from LIC, which my colleague, Mr. Tuhin Pandey, so successfully steered in the early months of the current financial year. We should continue to divest from LIC. You might wonder whether I'm asking him to put up more stake in the public markets. No, I'm talking about the divestment from a different kind of LIC, which is the licensing, inspection, and compliance regime. That is the LIC. So that is the LIC that we need to continue to divest from. And it is happening, as my colleague, Ms. Sumita Dawra, pointed out, very substantially at the union government level. But this needs to percolate down to the local government and state government levels as well, as it is happening in many places. But the focus should be very much on micro, small, and medium enterprises. Because for large enterprises, their ability to handle the compliance burden or the inspection regimes is relatively easier. They have the bandwidth, both managerial and financial. But small, medium, and micro enterprises do not have the bandwidth, both managerial and financial, and therefore their ability to concentrate on growing the business, sustaining it, while attending to the myriad licensing, inspection, compliance requirements is very difficult. Their ability is very constricted and they don't have the bandwidth. So therefore, from the point of view of MSMEs, continued LIC divestment is very important. While forums such as this always have lots of requests, justifiably so, on government as to what it can do, since I have the podium and the liberty, I'm going to leave also one request with the private sector, which is here, that we need to continue to do whatever we can to ensure that our MSME suppliers are paid on time. That ought to be the goal for industry forums and associations such as this. We need to see a big spike in these numbers in terms of number of enterprises, number of transactions, and the amounts that are paid on time to MSME enterprises. And also, the private sector, as much as the government, have a role in creating a trust-based society. The reason why we have elaborate LIC is because we are not a trust-based society. Whether it is with respect to time allotted for a speech, whether it is with respect to a deadline, whether it is with respect to the prices that our vendors quote, we know that what is set on paper is not the right one. We don't trust the price that is given there, we start bargaining. So the entire culture of bargaining, or the ease with which we ignore timelines given for speeches or remarks, I am aware of it myself. All those things are clear examples of us knowing what is given to us on paper will not be honored anyway. So we can afford to therefore take liberties or bargain, etc. And that in turn creates a lot of paperwork and a lot of second verification, self-verification, attestation, two proofs of address instead of one, because we are not a trust-based society. And therefore, whatever we can do to ensure that we become a trust-based society will take us from 7% GDP growth to 10% GDP growth. Infrastructure investments, ease of doing business, all those things will happen, will keep happening. We are at it, we are aware of them. But let's work on making sure that we become a trust-based society so that we can take each other at face value. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nageswaran, for those comments. We actually agree that both LICs need divestment. Your point on payment to MSME on time is very, very pertinent. It's something that I have only recently, as president of CII, written to all our members to ensure as well. Let us now move on, and may I request Shri Pandey for his special address.
President CI, Mr. Bajaj, friends, and my distinguished colleagues. My task is easier because I think CA has set the tone, and he is now, I don't know in what way, in the trust-based model that he is proposing, I fit in here. Shall we say that we have a lot of consensus that India must grow and must grow at at the rate at which we have been talking about double digits, touching double digits in case we have to graduate from, where we are at $2,000 per capita to something like $10,000 per capita by 2030. That itself is a tall order because I was listening to a conversation yesterday. Mr. Kotak was mentioning, let's think about the denominator. While we can go gung-ho about several things that we are doing on the numerator, but the denominator always has to be kept in mind. And we have to grow with the two things in mind. That means we have to have macroeconomic stability, and especially we have to be mindful of a fiscal deficit and also the external current account deficit. Then we need investments within this context, and investments in infrastructure, investments in manufacturing activity, in agriculture, investments in human capital, in health, education, skills. And we also don't need zombie investments. In fact, we can't afford them. Investments must give us returns, and they must pay for itself, because then only we can, again cycle them back. And this is where I think we have to have several elements which need to fit in. On the one side, we are talking of capex. On the other side, we must also talk about competitiveness and productivity. Divestments, asset monetization, all these things are usually, in fact, Mr. Bajaj also put that in a bucket of raising resources. I would rather say that it is more a cutting across item rather than simply a budget item. Why so? Now, basically, we're talking of productivity and competitiveness. Basically, we're talking of capex. What's happening is when we are actually divesting, instead of the government taking the responsibility of further capex, we are entrusting that possibility of capex to private sector. So it's not that in the same economy. And why we are saying so, we said private sector should be able to raise productivity, and therefore they would be able to get better value for money from the same investments. And that's the key. So I would say that if you really, just to give you an example of some of the divestments too, many people are aware of Air India privatization, and you can see, spin-off happening every day. So it's not in the nature of, the government getting resources, or to some extent government saving the opportunity cost, because we had to put 20 crores a day in the budget, from the budget. But also because, there was a stage in that organization where it couldn't grow, and growth was very important, particularly for when we had India as a 5 trillion economy and onwards to a very large economy. I mean, the second or the third largest. So we have to have growth of enterprises in mind. I'll give you another example of, Nilachal Ispat Nigam Limited, where for 10 years in the public sector, the asset was completely underperforming to its potential. And within 3 months of its divestments, there is, 3 times the workers on the spot. The workers are all paid. There is a growth path. There is an investment of $10 billion plan for this decade. Now, one single asset triggers an investment of $10 billion in a place, and possibly also a lot of spin-off, on the direct and indirect employment in that area. So this is what the divestments can do. And in mind you, in that government did not get any receipts in the budget. So therefore, if you really look at it, because we were not directly even having equity in that. So the question is, if we start looking at reforms, we should start looking at divestments not from that budget angle, from the way the economic growth of that enterprise as well as the economic growth of the country. Because after all, we're talking of capex, we're talking of productivity. Both these things are met when some of the things. Asset monetization is another bucket. And what exactly is being done? The money is not coming to the resources of the government directly, but it triggers a capex cycle where, for example, if you have done some roads and you can upfront get the payment through either an InvIT model or through an TOT model or through a securitization, and put that money back into roads. So therefore, what you're doing is you are triggering a capex cycle, not really putting a burden on the government, direct government budget. So therefore, these are the kind of things we have to do. I mean, when we are saying unlocking the economic potential of enterprises, unlocking economic potential of India, bringing private sector, on the forefront to bring the capex thing, because government will require, in any case, investments to be done in several areas. There are certain areas in the social sector where the government must step up, in fact, faster in order to catch up. So I would say that sustainably investing in infrastructure and raising productivity and competitiveness is supposed to be a very major driver of growth. Otherwise, we might even get stuck. We have examples of very huge capital spendings in infrastructure in many countries, but they are not economically viable, and they are in fact leading to problem of macroeconomic stability in those countries. So sustainability of those investments have to be kept in mind, and India has a huge potential and we must exploit it. We must use that potential to grow. I think for this moment I will, and I'll be very happy to get questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey. I'm going to start by asking a question each to our guests and then open it up to the audience. So please think of your questions as well. We do have 15, 18 minutes or so. So starting with Mr. Pandey, you actually made a very obvious but interesting point that divestment is not only about the government letting go of an asset at a fair price. Of course, that happens, but it's also about releasing that asset or that business for further growth, further capital investment, and which helps growing the economy. But coming back to our CA's truth-based suggestion, I'm going to go back to the divestment target of 65,000 crore for the year, of which about 28,000 crore has been completed. So to Shri Pandey, what are the next set of divestments which you can, whatever you can share with us, because we believe with the truth-based, trust-based, sorry, trust, truth, same thing. The trust-based commitment of the government to divest 65,000 crores. So what more can we expect in this year?
I think divestments are an ongoing thing. And as said that divestments are of two kinds. One is that we have minority stake sales in the market, some of the listed companies. And I think there we have a clear stance of be very mindful, like any prudent thing of, doing a value-based divestments rather than just to chase a target. We know that we have got minority investors in mind. We know that those have invested. So therefore, it's not a question of just, coming every other day and diluting whatever we have. And it's not like a golden, just for that golden hen, and, you just cut it out one day. We have got actually 62,000 crores of resources already raised this year. And Mr. Bajaj, you picked up only on 28,000 crore. That's a very interesting story. And I would really say that why are you ignoring the 34,000 crore of dividend that we have received? Money is money, money is fungible. And so therefore, this is the thing, divestments are there, but they are a part of the entire spectrum. We also need that our CPSCs and PSCs must perform well. If they are listed stocks, they must give good returns. And that is another very important objective that we have, that in our performance evaluation system, where some, they have got bonuses, etc., which are linked, we really want them, to what extent we have introduced the elements, like to what extent, your market cap has increased. What is your return asset turnover ratio? What is the return on capital employed that you are giving? And what is the consistent dividend? If you really look at it, our PSCs are giving consistent dividend, to the investors. And we have this year, due to all these measures, your BSC and CPSC, BSC CPSC index, as well as Nifty CPSC, has grown at twice the rate of general Sensex and general Nifty. So, creating the value, after all, we have got market cap of about 22 lakh crore in the listed public sector enterprises, and of which about 12 lakh crores belong to the government, and the rest is outside. So we are also mindful of that. The second leg of that is the strategic sales. In the strategic sales, we have what we call privatization. There, it is a handing over of management control. So essentially, it takes about 9 to 10 months minimum in order to do that, because all the prospective bidders have to run through a process, and they must also do due diligence before they make a financial bid. In some cases, we do have a system of hiving off of non-core assets. Sometimes, many of our public enterprises have non-core assets which are not really linked to the operating company. Earlier, there was a system when PSC used to be given land very liberally by the state governments. So many of them are holding very big land banks. Now that land is valuable, and that land can be actually divested as a real estate, and it can actually spur a good urban growth, urban regeneration in several cities. So we have to take that land out, and we had two important amendments. One in the Stamp Duty Act, another was an Income Tax Act on capital gains, where the demerging the assets out of the CPSCs into another PSC, a separate real estate company, was made tax neutral. There was no additional tax on that at the time of demerger. So that would lead to some of these companies, some of the land being taken out and separately divested. So we are building up a model which is sustainable, which goes over a time, where not only the land which is taken out is also valued and separately and taken out. The others is operating companies are then divested as operating companies. So what I'm saying is, in the M&A, it is a little time-intensive activity. We do have, of course, an ongoing transaction of IDBI Bank, and we do have other announcements. We have got HLL Life Care, which is an ongoing. We have a consulting company, which is an ongoing. We have got BEML, which is an ongoing, which has got SCI, which is ongoing. So these are the things that we need to go on and complete those transactions. Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is to the CA. The government has, over the years, come out with a number of very significant reform and is committed to continuing to do the same. Now, two of those were the labor and the farm reforms. And we know that they ended up facing some opposition, but the important thing is both of them are very important reforms. In your opinion, is this something that we can expect to see coming back on the table, keeping in mind that in 24 we are going to go into elections, or do you think this is something that will go into the next government?
Actually, I would take the liberty of responding to your earlier question to Tuhin for a few seconds before I respond to your question. So you invoked my comment about the trust-based society when you posed the question. Of course, I was speaking about contracts. And a budget commitment is not a contract, it is a statement of intent. And secondly, also when we talk of the various impediments and the processes that come in the way of divestment or privatization, there is multiple stakeholders feel that they may lose out when this happens. That could include competition, that could include the region, that could include labor class, etc. So there are so many hurdles, including sometimes even the private sector has a role to play in helping with the timeline of divestment. So I will leave it there. And then the question about product market, factor market reforms like land and labor. I think there is supposedly a consensus in the country across political spectrum and even otherwise society, social spectrum, that these are needed to improve productivity of land and also to improve labor productivity and also to incentivize more hiring. But obviously when this political consensus when somebody attempts to translate this political consensus into policy initiative, it again runs into the same political economy problem, and there is a sort of a time inconsistency. So I think many reforms in India, including, for example, privatization of Air India, etc., have eventually happened. May not have happened in the time span that was originally intended, but ideas whose time have come will eventually become a reality.
Thank you. And I must say, not only as Indian industry, but just as citizens, we are very aware of the challenges it takes for privatization. And that's why privatizations like Air India, which were being talked about, I don't know for how many decades, are a very significant achievement of the government, and equally important that the private sector makes those investments work, because that's what gives confidence then to the government and to people to continue with those reforms. Moving on to Sumita ji. You spoke a little bit about the national logistics policy, and we think that this is something very significant, keeping in mind additional competitiveness. Can you elaborate in some amount of detail? What are some of the on-ground changes or benefits in the next 2 to 3 years one can expect to see as a result of this policy?
Well, as we are aware, the Gati Shakti program and the logistics policy looks at a convergence approach, a whole of government approach, bringing all the stakeholders together, whether these are the states, the government ministries, the private developers of warehouses or of the logistical related infrastructure. So this is a convergence approach where we are taking a holistic view to improving logistics infrastructure and also connectivity. So we have been working on standardizing the logistics related infrastructure, making it on par with international standards, developing better connectivity. You are aware of the multimodal logistics parks which are being developed, and bringing standardization there so that what are the kind of facilities we can expect gets standardized, benchmarked, and hopefully also looking at some point in time, meeting benchmarks for certification, global standards. So in the next 2 years, this is where we are going, bringing everybody together to deliver more logistics efficiency and better connectivity for both freight movement, passenger movement, and also for social infrastructure related facilities like schools, health centers, Anganwadi centers, as we are onboarding the social infrastructure ministries also onto the Gati Shakti portal. Now, if you look at telecom related infrastructure, which is already being planned as per the Gati Shakti portal and our policy, We are already using the facility to find out which are the areas which are not covered by the optic fiber cable, by the telecom towers, and these unmapped areas are being prioritized for giving better connectivity, to give one example. Another example is for the 5G rollout, states and union territories are using the policy framework to be able to plan better and to be able to have an integrated approach. Similarly, where do you locate your high schools, for instance? Will they have better connectivity? Will they have better access for people? So it is in the context of giving better outcomes for businesses, for manufacturing facilities, for manufacturing clusters, for social infrastructure, for our citizens. These are the kind of changes we are looking forward to in the next 2 years or so.
Thank you for that. Let's try and take a couple of questions. We got 5 minutes. Let's keep them focused and short. Where can we start? Okay, gentleman here in front in the blue shirt. Can somebody give him a mic? Please state your name and your question.
Yeah, my name is Kanta Parmeshwara, shortly GP Rao. I'm an executive of RINL, Visakhapatnam Steel Plant. The question is for our DIPAM sir, Pandey ji. What is the meaning of strategic sale of Vizag Steel? Then that is my main query. Then maybe privately I will discuss with you 1 or 2 points about Vizag Steel.
No, can you just repeat your question again slowly?
The RINL is a Rashtriya Ispat Nigam Limited.
Yeah, right.
It is on a strategic sale now.
Strategic sale.
Yeah.
So you want to know whether that is going to happen or not?
But anyway, it is going to happen for sure. Then what is the roadmap? What is the timeline?
No, the in principle approval is there, and we are going forward in working out the transaction structure and move forward.
Can we get some gender diversity? Any ladies in the audience that would like to ask a question? Okay, the gentleman over here.
My name is Pradeep Dhir. We are talking about India moving towards 7 trillion or 10 trillion economy in next 10 years, or we're targeting 2030. To increase this GDP growth in a multiple fold, we need to spend on R&D to ensure that we have a backup plan for basic and allied and developed technologies coming through, which will increase the employment as well as resources. India has not been able to spend or not spending much on R&D. We are dependent on developed countries to bring technology into India, and then we would like to grow there. Any thought on increasing R&D's expenditure? And the budget session is coming up. Are we talking about that? How we built up this R&D into growth of moving towards 3 times the economy?
It's an important issue. The question is, how do you do that? Because we have been talking about, so who does the R&D, how it is done, how it is pulled back, I mean, as a self-sustaining model. Typically, there is one is the funded by the state, R&D funded by the state. The second thing is the inherent interest of any producing organization to do its R&D to remain in business or to make business. For example, pharmaceutical companies will actually constantly be doing R&D, because if they do that, they can patent it and then, use the patent regime to actually encash it. And there are companies who are doing it. Same thing is with, in Indian auto companies and others, they would also be, doing that. In Indian steel companies, they would be interested in doing an R&D because they would, I think any industry where, there is a certain level which is reached, then obviously there would be resources which the company management must do in order to do that R&D. And the question is whether there's an incentive structure to do that, whether there's a tax incentives which need to be done, whether the National Research Foundation could be used to do that, or whether the government, industry partnership through Government Research Institute can be hastened. I think this will require one full day to see how it should happen. As we have been talking about it, we still are less than our expectation in R&D, but how to push it, what's the sustainable model of pushing R&D is an issue.
If you have to increase your GDP, you have to have government spending first, like if you look at the US, from 56 to 80, they spend 56% or 70% of the budget in R&D on the basic, and then they start growing the economy. I don't see that kind of intensity in India. So we talk about economy to grow 3 times.
See, different countries have done this in different ways at different periods of time. In addition to what Shri Pandey said, there is an equal responsibility on us as private sector to invest in R&D, to innovate for our own selves. The government cannot do everything. The government also has priorities. The US did not have 1.4 billion people. Keep in mind that. So different governments will have different priorities as well, and the government has a number of initiatives that spurs R&D growth anyway. But and as CI, we'll keep pushing the government to do more. But let us not take away from our own responsibility. Don't we want to build internationally competitive businesses ourselves? So we don't do R&D because the government is giving us some benefit. We do it just so that not only we stay alive, we get competitive, but we go and conquer the world. So I think it's a joint working that needs to be done. I know there are more questions, but we have run out of time. So please join me in thanking our guests for the time they spent with us this morning and for their interesting insights as well. Thank you. This session comes to a close.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next session is going to start immediately as soon as we've got the table set. But for your information, there is another session at 12, between 12 and 12:30 in the hall upstairs, in the Regal Hall that you all are familiar with, in conversation session on Center-State Partnership, where we have Mr. N.K. Singh and Mr. Nadir Godrej in conversation. So for those who would like to attend that, that's from 12 to 12:30 in the Regal Hall. And our session now is the session on economic slowdown, inflation, government debt, policy priorities for emerging economies. We will have the session right here now in another few minutes. Who's ringing the bell? I don't know. You have to get people in. That's okay, but there's no other issue. Send people from outside first. I think we're now ready to start with the next session. Our speakers will be joining us soon. May I request some of you who are walking in to come and sit forward. Please come. Aye, aye. So. I welcome all the speakers and all of you to this session on economic slowdown, inflation, government debt, policy priorities for emerging economies. We have with us Mr. Neelkant Mishra, Managing Director, Co-Head of Asia Pacific Strategy and India Strategist, Credit Suisse, and Member Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. We have with us Dr. Sajid Z. Chenoy, Chief India Economist, JP Morgan, and Member Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister of India. Dr. Chetan Ghate, Director, Institute of Economic Growth. Dr. Taimur Beg, Managing Director and Chief Economist, DBS Bank. Dr. Emila Skork, Lead Economist for India, Macroeconomics, Trade and Investment Global Practice, the World Bank Group. Moderating the session is Mr. Vilayan Subaya, Executive Vice Chairman, Tube Investments of India Limited. Sir, may I request you to give your remarks and take the session forward. Over to you, Mr. Vilayan.
Actually, I think given time and given that you're here to listen to the five of them versus listen to me, I'm just going to ask if Chetan can start with his presentation. We'll take just either presentations or brief remarks from all five of them to begin, and then we'll get into a Q&A. So Chetan, if you can just go ahead and start, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much to the CII for inviting me. And hello, everybody. This draws on recent work with Piali and Shubhadeep.